on to video number 2 of Girls and Autism, Educational, Family and Personal Perspectives. So the next part of the book talks about employment, and on page 156 there's a little discussion about the under-identification of girls with autism and how this results in a lack of support, and this then has implications for post-school success. I quote, "A lack of disability self-awareness created an additional barrier to post-school success. Without a clear understanding of their limitations or the accommodations needed, it was difficult for young women to articulate their needs and make a plan to succeed." So I thought that was really interesting because it suggests that autistic women are maybe more likely to be unemployed than autistic men, and I'm not sure if they've really looked into this, but it makes sense because after all, women, regardless of disability, are historically more likely not to have a good job than men. Less likely. Less likely to have a good job than men, and tend to be underemployed, and obviously there's a wage gap, and that's regardless of disability. So you introduce a disability, and that discrepancy is bound to widen. And of course, men and women might both be autistic, but being female is an extra layer of disadvantage in the society that we live in, and that's obviously where the social model is correct, because it emphasises societal factors, and obviously gender is a massive societal factor. It can be a huge disadvantage. It doesn't have to be. Obviously, it's not inevitable, but in the society that we live in, being female is a disadvantage. And if you're autistic, you're already disadvantaged. You add female into that, it's an extra whammy. So just being a woman as well as being autistic might mean you're actually less likely to be employed relative to autistic men of the same cognitive level and type of autism. Because of that underdiagnosis, you're not going to have the support, and the more support an autistic gets when young, that's going to make it more likely that they can be a functioning member of society when they're older. I can completely relate to that, as I obviously had no understanding of my needs pre-diagnosis, and of course I was in a lot of denial as well, which didn't help matters because it meant that I wasn't receptive to support because I didn't think I had any problem. So obviously, when for example my parents suggested that I have counselling, and the school suggested I had counselling as well, and this was at secondary school, because I think the school were aware they were aware that something was a little bit awry, but they just didn't really seem to do anything. But they suggested counselling. I should go and see a school counsellor, but I didn't. I was supposed to, but I didn't. I think because of the stigma, because I associated it as admitting to having a mental problem. I thought it was weak. I also thought that going on benefits was weak because I bought into the idea that society preaches that kind of, that being on benefits was a sign of, lack of character. All the stuff which obviously I do not 100% do not believe. I've grown up from that view, and I 100% don't believe that. But that's what I used to think because that's what you read or hear. And I was like, I'm not going on benefits, and my mum was like, well, where are you going to get money from then? Because I couldn't work, and I was in denial and everything. And eventually I had to accept that actually I needed to go on benefits, and also I had to come to terms with the fact that I couldn't work because I had these issues, and that was a long kind of coming awareness process. But obviously if I had that support at a lot earlier age, we just don't know, do we? But unfortunately I didn't get that support, and my mental health and anxiety levels got so extreme that I just I wasn't employable. Again we hear from Sarah Jane Quitchley from the Autism Education Trust, which is a training provider. And she said that there's a 2017 report of investigation into education by the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Autism that fewer than 5 in 10 staff felt confident in supporting autistic children, as 70% of parents said that support was not put in place quickly enough. So that's a shocking indictment of the educational system. And she wrote, by the way, A Different Joy, and she's a parent of an autistic herself. I'd quite like to read that book. And then we hear from Rachel Townsend. Now, Rachel Townsend is autistic, and she works for the National Autistic Society training team. And this is the last chapter in the book, chapter 18, entitled Success as an Adult Autistic Female, co-written by Carol Povey, who works for the National Autistic Society Centre for Autism. So they ask, what is success? And it suggested that it's best to let the person themselves define their own attainable version of success. For example, being the best yourself possible, which then leads to self-acceptance. And I touched on that earlier in my view as well, about what is success. Rachel Townsend says that social expectations restrict her, not autism per se, and she does not feel disabled. And this is completely unlike me. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here because I've talked about it elsewhere. But for me, in my experience, autism is an innate disability. Yes, society does add extra layers of disadvantage and problem. There are many aspects of society that are not conducive to living a healthy life as an autistic person. Society's life is too noisy, there are too many changes. It could be a lot better for autistic people, and probably for everyone actually. Autistics are a bit like a kind of proverbial, what's that saying? Birding a bird mine. Bird mine? I don't know what I'm talking about. My mind's gone. It's canary. That's the one. Canary in the mine. You know, where you put a canary down to check how things are. And it's it's almost like autistics kind of, if there's a problem, autistics experience it first because we're most sensitive, as it were. So maybe the whole of society would benefit if things were more autism friendly, just because I think everyone suffers on some level from the noise in society and from the way things are so fast paced and the change and everything. It's just autistics struggle even more with it. But yeah, so I disagree with her that autism isn't disabling per se. She says that the only thing disabling to me is other people and their expectations. When I remove social pressure, I am able to be the real me, free and successful. In my case, however, even when I'm not with people, I still struggle because of my innate problems, like my innate problems organising myself, my burnout just from existing. I don't need to be around people to experience burnout. You know, my intense interests give me a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction, but at the same time, they are very draining as well because of the absolute intensity of my hyperfocus is tiring, and that's kind of this double-edged sword that comes from being autistic, that there always is a negative even contained within some of the positive aspects. So I just don't agree with her. For me, autism is a disability. Even if I were to live on a desert island without any people and could 100% control my own life, I would still be struggling. She says that she's successful at being myself when she's not around people and things, no masks, no burnout. Unlike me, she appears to have a very successful, quite conventional life, She's happily married, she lives independently, she's expecting her first child, she has a small group of friends, she works full-time in a job, she loves, I'm envious. So, she has quite a conventional life in that respect. And I would argue, well, if she doesn't think it's a disability, it's actually probably precisely because she isn't actually that disabled. If you can do all of those things, I know it's controversial to say that, but if you can do all of those things, and your autism is obviously not so severe that you can't function. She's obviously clearly, succeeding pretty well. I know it's controversial to say that within autism circles, but I don't care. I just speak my mind. I do think that, obviously, there are different types of autism, and some types of autism can make it easier for a person to function quite successfully, but unfortunately, not everyone has the same type of autism. And in my case, I am more innately disabled because I just cannot do those things, and that is a real disadvantage and something that I really, it's just no fun really, is it? But you have to kind of come to terms with that. So I disagree because, well, obviously, I can't, her experience is her experience, and clearly she doesn't have the same type of autism as me. But, obviously, she doesn't struggle as much as I do with those areas, because you have to have a certain amount of social skill in the first place to be able to do all of those things, But, on the other hand, you can't really compare because, as she says, although she would appear by societal standards to be successful, it's not, on the surface at least, but her inner experience kind of belies the appearance of success, because she experienced a lot of internal angst. She feels a fear around the stability of her life on a daily basis. What if I get made redundant? What if I'm forced into the social world for more hours than I can handle? It says she leaves me feeling she is constantly failing, and she feels most successful with her small remote work team at home with her husband, and that gives her a sense of security. And when she has that environment, she claims that she's not disabled, and that it's only society that disables her. And like I said, that's her experience, and it's a valid one. But I do think it's problematic when people like that, who I do think are in the autistic aristocracy, because they are very successful and have a pretty normal life. And let's face it, all people struggle. You know, there are many non-autistics who have a similar lifestyle. They might have mental health problems and struggle and have the same fears. You know, I do think that there are differing degrees of impairment in autism, and quite clearly she's not as impaired as, say, someone who can't do those things, regardless of how much she might struggle. And, you know, her life clearly isn't plain sailing, and she has her own very real predicaments. But at the same time, if she can achieve all of those things, then clearly she's not as impaired, because, like I said, many non-autistic people also struggle with those feelings for different reasons, obviously, if they're not autistic. But it's quite a common human thing to have mental health problems and to worry about losing your job and stuff. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, if you can lead a conventional life like that, you're not really as impaired as someone who can't. So clearly she doesn't have the same type of autism as, say, someone like me, just as I don't have the same type of autism as someone who can't talk, you know? And I just think she needs to be careful not to generalise, because autism can be a very real disability. It is for me, and it is for many other people, an innate disability. Oh yes, and then we get to, now I do think, again on, and then on page 173, it talks about the empowerment to know and accept oneself, to reduce the need for masking and burnout, as I mentioned. Understanding self enables self-protection. For example, how to energy account. Marja Trudell, an autistic speaker, talks about energy accountancy and how to avoid burnout. For example, thinking about what activities deplete, what restore. For example, withdrawals that might be masking, socialising and sensory. And that's part of the reason why you need a timely diagnosis. You can kind of work out solutions to these problems, because you need to have self-awareness to understand how to live the best life for you. Without self-awareness, you're not going to know what stresses you and what to do about it. And I'm still learning. I'm a lot more aware than I used to be, but there's still many things that I'm finding out every single day, because I think it's probably a lifelong process. And then the media also comes into play as well, in terms of how it portrays autism. You need to know what your strengths and struggles are, who your peer supports are. You need to know where you fit. You need to meet like-minded individuals. This is all really important. Another reason why diagnosis is so important. The media is becoming more inclusive of a wider spectrum now, says Townsend, and it's showing success in terms of things such as career can be achieved. That is good to show, that autistics can achieve things, because in the past it often tended to focus on everything autistics can't do, and now it's kind of shifted to kind of looking more at like success. And while that is a good thing on one hand, I do think it's important not to go too far in the other direction, because often you don't see people on benefits, and there's nothing wrong with being on benefits. Like I said earlier, I used to think that being on benefits was a sign of you have problems, and that's part of the reason why I was in denial for so long. But actually, that's partly because I imbibed a lot of this media crap about people on benefits, like being scroungers and things like that, which obviously is completely false. Because nothing wrong. If you can't work because you've got a disability, that's not your fault. But it's just the way media doesn't show this in a good way, and they do need to represent people with autism on benefits and things to show the whole diversity of it. I never really see people like me represented. People who it's often one of two extremes. Either those who are completely dependent and need 24/7 care, and are really right at one extreme, and then you see those who are really successful. But you don't tend to see people like me in the middle, who are kind of squeezed middle, as I call it, to borrow an analogy from class. Yeah, a squeezed middle, you're kind of sandwiched in between these two extremes, and you just don't really see that being represented, and that could be quite alienating. So again, on the epilogue, it says that how girls can present